Up until this point, everything we've covered has been very functional, and there were some settings I skipped in order to get the tasks done. This section is going to cover all of the settings in depth so you know what everything does. The first group of settings that I want to look at are the general settings. So we can get to this from WooCommerce settings, and it's the first tab here, General. The first thing here is the store address, also known as the base location, which is where your store is located. This is used for shipping plugins, and is used when you import tax rates during the onboarding wizard. Go ahead and add your store address if you haven't already. If you do have multiple locations, go ahead and add your main address here. This next group of settings lets you control who you're selling to. Most stores leave it to all, selling to all countries and shipping to all countries. I might consider disallowing sales to Europe, since they have weird tax laws around digital products, and I might not want to get into that. At least not right away. Maybe get the store up and running, and then look into their VAT laws around digital products. The next setting down here is just related to shipping, so you might want to allow digital sales globally but not have to worry about international shipping, in which case you can just disable a couple of really far away countries. The default customer location is used when someone visits your site, and they haven't logged in. They haven't gone to the cart or checkout yet, so your site has no idea where they're from. The default is to take a guess with geolocation. You're basically using their IP address and checking it against a list of known IP addresses to guess where they're located. The reason you might want to do this is because certain countries have laws about how prices have to appear online. So if you're in the European Union, there are laws about including tax of the product in the price you see online. So if you're a US company and you have Nexus in the EU, you might want to show customers prices with that included. To do that, you have to take a guess where they're from, and geolocation is one of the best ways to do that. There is one other option here, geolocation with page caching support. You might want to use this option if you have a host that helps cache your pages. Sometimes they aggressively cache pages, and they're unfortunately shared between different customers. If you select this option, you append a query string to a page, which looks something like $A equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, which will force your site to load a whole new page. It makes the URL slightly less pretty, but it works very well against aggressively caching systems. I recommend leaving this to the default until you notice a problem. The next setting lets you disable or enable taxes entirely. If you're giving away all of your products for free, like an internal website for your company, then you can avoid taxes and just turn this off. But it seems pretty niche to me. The next group of settings are about coupons, which we talked about earlier, and we want to leave those on. And the last group of settings are for the currency. It lets you set the currency symbol itself, how decimals are handled, and what notation you use. Most stores aren't going to need to touch these, but they are there if you need them. The next group of settings are the product settings, which are mostly about how to display your products. The first subtab here, General, lets us choose our shop page, so we can choose exactly what page we want to list all of our products on, and we can choose any of the pages available to us. Next, we can choose what happens when you add something to the cart. If you tend to have a site where people only order one product at a time, you can actually redirect to the cart page after someone adds to the cart, but I'd only suggest this on sites where people basically order one product at a time. I really enjoy this setting. This lets people add things to the cart without changing the page. We can choose some image sizes, measurements, for all of our products. And down here at the bottom, we can modify our reviews. You definitely want to have product reviews on. I highly recommend the verified owner, which is for someone who actually purchased the product from you. And if you want, you can restrict reviews to people who are only verified owners. The next setting is for star reviews. These are really great once you get a bunch of reviews in. It will help people browse your store by highest rated products, so I recommend forcing people to leave a star review. Even if you have a few negative reviews, it's still worth displaying them. It shows other users that your product is worth buying, even if it's not a perfect product, and that is much better than not having reviews and having people wonder if your product isn't all hype. Let's scroll back up. The next tab here is for inventory and stock. The first setting will let you turn stock management on and off. That refers to WooCommerce tracking the stock of every single item and updating it with each order. The next setting can definitely be confusing. What does hold stock even mean? It's pretty much a setting just for PayPal Standard and a few other off-site gateways. When someone places an order on your site and then they go to PayPal to pay for their order, some users forget their passwords, they don't have enough money in their account, or for whatever reason, they don't actually pay for their order. WooCommerce sets the order to pending and waits until the allotted time is up. That's this number right here. If it expires, the stock is available again for someone else to purchase. So WooCommerce uses this number as a sort of reservation system for off-site gateways. You can set this to whatever number you want. If you're using a gateway like Stripe that does it instantly, you don't even need to worry about this. If I use PayPal, I tend to set it to 1,440, which is exactly 1 day. If the user doesn't pay within a day, the order is cancelled and the stock is returned. These next settings are about notifications. WooCommerce will notify you when your stock gets below a certain point. This is super useful. If you know that you tend to sell 10 units a week, and it takes a week to get new units, you probably want to set the low stock notification to 10. If you have a bit more capital, you could set it to 15 or 20 just to make sure you never run out of stock. Out of stock is still helpful. And of course, you want to make sure you send it to the right person. The next setting lets you hide out-of-stock products. I don't normally recommend this. It's only useful if you have so many out-of-stock products that users can't find products in stock. Generally, it's best to leave your product page up when it's out of stock. People will find it, and they might even write you and ask when it's back in stock. There's even a few premium plugins that will let users go on a wait list and will automatically be emailed when the product comes back into stock. This is much preferable to hiding the item altogether. The next setting is about showing this remaining stock. I like to change this to only show quantity remaining when the stock is low. I'll click Save Changes. And the last tab is for downloadable products. There are 3 different ways to serve these downloaded files. Forced downloads is good, but won't work with every server. If you have problems, then I recommend redirect only. If you want, you can see a bit more about the nuances between these methods. I recommend leaving the other settings as they are. The next option would force users to log in, which isn't great. And the last option makes the user wait until you change an order status from processing to completed before they download their files. Once they've paid, they should have access. So I'll leave these as they are, and that'll take care of the product settings. We covered the tax, shipping, and payment settings earlier in this course, but there's a few we skipped over, so let's go over those now. Under the Shipping tab, there's a sub-tab called Shipping Options, and there are a few really useful features here. You can enable or disable the shipping calculator on the cart page. Some themes render a mini cart page on all pages, and constantly calculate the shipping charges on every page load, which can be a burden on your server. So if you need, you can disable that shipping calculator or you can hide shipping costs until they enter an address. If you do run into issues with shipping, and you're wondering why your shipping methods aren't showing up, you can turn on shipping debug mode right here at the bottom. This is a really powerful tool. Just don't forget to turn it off once you launch your store. Under Payments, there is one useful feature I really want to point out. The first is that you can put the gateway you want your customers to use up top. Under Accounts and Privacy, there are a ton of settings we can tweak. First of all, accounts in WooCommerce are very useful. Once you've created one, you can log into the site and it remembers your address. And depending on the gateway, it remembers your payment method as well. That is super useful for users and makes them more likely to check out in the future. The first 2 settings are about guest checkout. If you turn this off, users will have to create an account at checkout. This can be really putsy on a mobile device, and it's still a pain on a regular desktop. If I'm making a one-off purchase, like a Christmas present for a friend, and I'm likely to never come back to that store, I don't like making accounts. So I'd be really annoyed if you made me make one. You should get higher conversion rates by not forcing people to create accounts. I recommend leaving this setting on. The next setting lets them log in during checkout. I definitely like reminding customers to log in on the checkout page. If they enter their email address and password, it'll pre-fill their billing and shipping addresses for them. Overall, this should save them time and more importantly, it will save them from making mistakes like an incorrect credit card number. Since accounts are so useful, I like giving my customers the opportunity to create an account during the checkout, as well as on the My Account page. The next 2 settings are about how the account gets created. WordPress lets users create handles. You don't have to log in with an email address, it could be anything. This top setting sets their email address as their handle. It's a little bit less confusing to just have them remember their email address, so I like leaving this on. The next setting won't let a user create a password when they create an account. A password will be automatically created for them and emailed from your site. I'm a bit torn on this issue. Some people make terrible passwords, like 1234. This setting gets around that issue by generating one for them, but then they probably have a very low chance of remembering it, so they aren't likely to log in. I currently leave this off, but it's something that might change in the future. The next settings are about GDPR and giving users the right to delete data about themselves. I turn all of these on, so if a user wants to delete information about themselves through the account erasure process, it deletes their WooCommerce data as well. A bit further down the page, we have the privacy policy. Every store should have a privacy policy. You can find a bunch of privacy templates online, and then modify them for your own store. Then just create a new page, and link to it right here. The last group of settings lets you delete data automatically. I don't usually turn these on, but they're there if you want to delete inactive data. Before we get into email settings themselves, I want to touch on email deliverability. At WooCommerce Store, we'll send a lot of emails. There are multiple emails sent to the customer, low stock notifications, emails sent to the store owner, etc. And web servers aren't typically set up in such a way to be able to send that many emails, and sometimes those emails fail. Not getting an email about a new order could be a pretty big problem. You don't log in because you don't think there's an order, and your customer just sits there and gets more and more frustrated until they initiate a chargeback which costs you money. There is a solution to this problem. You can set up a free account with a SMTP provider, basically, a company that will send out all of your email for you, with servers that are built so that emails won't fail. There's a list of providers on this page. I'm a big fan of Mailgun, and is what I use on my site. I'm also partial to SendGrid, as they're from Denver, which is where I live. We won't go through account creation here, but it's worth setting up a free account to make sure all of your emails go through successfully. Since these accounts send 10,000 or more emails per month for free, I usually have just one account for all of my clients. Now let's go back to our email settings. There's a huge list of emails here, and we can click into any of them and see the settings for this email. You can turn them on or off. You can send them to multiple people. You can change the subject. And you can add a heading, as well as change the email type from HTML to plain text. I tend to prefer plain text emails for admin uses. It's cleaner and easier to read. The next setting lets you copy templates into your theme, which is useful if you want to customize how the emails look. We won't go into customizing emails in this course, but it's covered in detail in my WordPress Customizing WooCommerce Themes course here in the library. Don't forget to click Save Changes when you're done. If you look at your settings screen right now, you might not see an integration tab, and that's because it only shows up when you have an active integration. Because we have a few integrations active, I can see this tab, and there will be sub-tabs for each individual integration. Most integrations with third-party services will show up here, so if you plan to connect to other services, look for their settings right here. However, some services use the WooCommerce API to connect. We can find the API under Advanced, and then REST API. This page lets you create a key that another application can use to get all of the data from your store. Let's create one just to show you how to do it. So if I really want to connect my store to a custom warehouse pick and packing app on my phone so I can see what's happening at all times, I'll create a new API key. And I'll call this the test API key, and I can assign it to myself, that's fine, and then permissions. Read means it can access all the data on my store, but it can't make any changes. Write means it can send data, but it can't read anything. And then read and write means you can do both, access and update data. As a rule of thumb, don't give people more access than they need. If you're connecting to an analytics service, just give them access to read your site. If you're connecting to some sort of shipping app that reads orders and then can also update the status of those orders, you'll likely have to give them both read and write access. Go ahead and generate the API key. And here's all the information we need to connect to the store. One note, if you leave this page and try to come back, you won't be able to see the full key, and you'll have to create a new one. There is one more thing to cover, and those are webhooks. Think of webhooks as a way to automatically send data to a service without needing an API. So you could automatically send a service information about each new order with a webhook. This can be useful, but they're a bit of a pain to set up, and I generally recommend setting up and installing plugins for services before trying to use webhooks that can be set up incorrectly. If some service requires webhooks, they'll tell you how to configure them. Just know that there's a page for them right here. There's one sub-tab under Advanced that we didn't look at yet, and that is Page Setup. Here we can see the cart, checkout, my account, and terms and conditions page, and by default, terms and conditions should be empty. If you ever wanted to use a different page for cart or checkout for some reason, you could do so. Just change it to whatever page you want. For your terms and conditions, you'll want to find a generator online, copy and paste it into its own page, and then select that page here. These terms and conditions will show up automatically during the checkout, and users will have to agree to them. Let's go ahead and do that quickly. I'll just select a random page here. I'll click About, save these changes, and let's go to the front end. Proceed to checkout. And here you can see I have read and agreed to the website's terms and conditions, which links to the page we selected just a minute ago. Let's go back to our settings. The next group are what are called endpoints. Think of them as WordPress pages without actually being pages. They look and feel like a page, but you can't edit the content. The content is all dynamic based on who logs in, and it comes from WooCommerce, so you could change the URL. And the last thing that's worth mentioning, some plugins, like WooCommerce subscriptions, have so many settings that they'll create their own settings tab, either up here or they'll add settings to one of these tabs. So if you have some complicated WooCommerce extensions, look for the settings up here.